In the last section, we ran the docker ps command, and we saw one variation of it, which was docker ps --all. When we ran --all on here, we saw that we got a printup of all the containers we'd ever started up on our machine, which was kind of interesting, because it kind of begs the question, when does a container really get shut down? Why does it get shut down? And what happens when it gets shut down? So starting this section, I want to start to show you a little bit around the life cycle of a container, which is going to give you a better idea of what's going on behind the scenes. Now, before first investigating or just jumping to the end, like figuring out what happens when a container gets shut down, I want to kind of go all the way to the start and really figure out what happens when a container is first created. Now, we've learned at this point that to start up a new container from an image, we use the docker run command. But when we looked at this diagram, remember we looked at this diagram like 2 or 3 sections ago, you'll notice that I had put some very particular terminology here. I said creating and running a container. Creating a container and actually starting it up are actually 2 separate processes. So there's actually 2 additional commands in addition to docker run that we can use to start up a new container. Docker run, running that at your command line, is identical to running 2 other commands together. First, docker create, and then docker start. As you might guess, the docker create commands is used to create a container out of an image, and then start is used to actually start an image. But at this point, you might be a little bit curious of, hey, what's the distinction between creating a container and actually starting a container? Let's look at a diagram that's going to help you understand the differences between the 2. So we've looked at a diagram like this several times before. Remember on our image over here, we've got that kind of file system snapshot of sorts, and we've also got a startup command. The process of creating a container is where we kind of take the file system in here and kind of prep it for use in this new container. When we create the container, we're just talking about kind of prepping or setting up this file system snapshot to be used to create the container. To actually start the container, that's when we actually execute this startup command that might start up the process of like hello world, or in the case of that BusyBox one that we used, the echo hi there, or whatever process is supposed to be executed inside the container. So again, creating a container is about the file system. Starting it is about actually executing the startup command. So with that in mind, let's try flipping over to our command line really quickly, and we're going to start to investigate the differences between creating a container and starting a container. Over at my command line, I'm going to first try running the docker create and start commands with the hello world image. So I will first do docker create hello-world. When I run that command, I get this long string of characters printed out. This is the ID of the container that was just created. I can now actually execute the hello world command inside of this container by running docker start, and then I'm going to add on a little argument here. I'm going to say -a. We'll talk about what that is in just a second. And then I'm going to paste the ID that was just emitted right here. So I'm going to paste in that really long series of characters. And then when I run this command, we'll see that familiar welcome message appear. So what happened here? Well, again, first off, we kind of prepped the container by getting that file system ready. Then after that, we actually executed the primary startup command in there with docker start. Now, what was with the -a right there? Well, to show you what's going on with that, let's try running docker start again, but without the -a. So I'm going to run docker start, and then I'm going to again paste in. Oops, I lost the thing. I got to do the create again very quickly. So there's my ID, and I'll do docker start, but without the -a this time. So when I run docker start, you'll notice that I just see the ID. The -a command is what's going to make Docker actually watch for output from the container and print it out to your terminal. So the -a specifically means, hey, kind of attach to the container, so to speak, and watch for output coming from it and print it out at my terminal. So when I put on docker start -a, that means give me any output that is coming from that thing. And when I run that, boom, there it is. So you'll notice that's a very small difference between docker run and docker start. By default, docker run is going to show you all the logs or all the information coming out of the container. By default, docker start is the opposite. Docker start is not going to show you information coming out of the terminal. All right, so that's the differences between Docker run and Docker start and Docker create. Let's take a quick pause right here. We're going to come back to the next section and we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what it meant when we saw with the Docker PS all that exited status. So quick break and I'll see you in just a minute.